Hello and welcome to another video, and in today's such video I'm going to be talking about which nation was the first into space, or more importantly, which cultural group, which identity was the first to make it into space, to begin the space race. And until quite recently, I, as many other people I think, always thought that it was the damn all Americans, always getting up there, you know, all the Americans always getting up into space. I think the only 11 men that have been on the moon have all been American. Anyway, but no, the first nation to get into space, the first nation to put a man-made object, such as this pen, into space, was Nazi Germany. Yeah, kind of scares you to think about it, because there was that whole Hollywood fiasco of a film called Iron Sky. You know, space zeppelins coming from the moon and everything. Anyway, so yes, Nazis were the first nation into space. And they did this with their quite revolutionary V2 rocket program. Yes, the V2 rockets were quite extraordinary rockets. They were 14 meters high. They weighed 12.5 tons, and they could produce 20... They weighed 12.5 tons, and they could produce 25 metric tons of thrust. That's quite a lot of thrust. And so they would use these V2 rockets, had a range of about 314 kilometers, and with that range they could bomb all of southeast England. And they were so fast and quick that the British, the Allies, didn't actually know what was hitting them. They couldn't actually see the rocket flying over. They thought that when a house was bombed or something, that it was a gas leak that had created this massive explosion. But no, it was actually the Nazis sending in rockets. So yes, V2 rockets. And there was one man, General Walter Dornberger, who was in charge of this more pacifist approach with the V2 rockets, this more pacifist program of getting into space, seeing how high they can go. And typically there are two ideas of where our atmosphere, Earth's atmosphere, ends and space begins. You see, NASA claims it to be 80 kilometers high, or 62 miles, or 60 miles, 80 kilometers, I think that's about right. That's where they claim space begins. And then the international Kalmar line, as it's known, is 100 kilometers above sea level, and that's where space begins. So officially, according to NASA, according to the Nassian, what's it called? Nassian idea of where space begins, the Nazis were the first beyond that 80-kilometer mark on the 3rd of October 1942. 3rd of October 1942. That kind of blows your mind that the average human doesn't really know that fact, I think. I didn't know it. I think we all suspect the Americans were the first into space, but no, the Nazis were into space in 1942. It's quite amazing, really. At least I think it is. So they launched a V2 rocket, and it got in between 85 and 90 kilometers high. That was the officially recorded German documents of where this rocket got to. And of course, you might think, but you see, old boy, the Germans are just making up numbers to make it look like they were first into space. But you have to think of it with the thoughts of a German back then. There was no NASA, so this 80-kilometer pass mark hadn't been devised yet. There was no Kalmar line, so this 100-kilometer mark hadn't been passed yet. There was no European Space Agency. There was no NASA. There was, as I said before, there was no Russian Space Agency, Indian, Chinese. No one was getting into space. The space race hadn't started yet. There was no reason to lie at all. So I think we can pretty much count that as the truth. So yeah, that was the first man-made object into space, launched from Peenemünde in Germany. And when that happened, General Walter Dornberger is quoted for saying, "The space age is born," which I think is quite an amazing quote for something in 1942. And then you go, aha, of course, but McMurdo, what about because of course you've got NASA who declares that space is 80 kilometers high and above, but what about, NASA's just the Americans, isn't it? And there's a lot more to the world than Americans, as I like to think. And so I thought, yes, damn right, only NASA says that, the Nazis haven't really got into space. But alas, they have. They have gone past the 100-kilometer internationally recognised Kalmar line in June 1944, in which they launched it was a more adapt for vertical testing, which is what they were doing with this rocket at the time. I think it was called the A4, so it was like a variant of the V2, which didn't have the warhead on it. Anyway, and that got to 189 kilometers in the air, into space. 189 kilometers, and that's past that's way past the Kalmar line. And that was just testing. That was vertical testing of the rocket. So there you go. None of this American nonsense. The Nazis were the first nation to put a man-made object into space. Oh yes, and I hope you like my new hat as well. I do quite like it. It's a bit of a naval kind of variant, I suppose. Very nice hat, I think. I actually got it from BCF, Boating, Camping, Fishing. I was quite surprised it was there, but there you go, Looked like Lord Mountbatten, whatever you want. But anyway, alas, the Nazis put the first man-made object into space.